All right. For those of you that are here, welcome. Oh, good. We're up to 22 people. Excellent. And geez, I wish it would stop doing that. Welcome. And where's my, there it is. Happy New Year to everybody. Hope this one is a whole lot better than the last one. So once again, it is being recorded, just so everybody knows, for the purposes of getting it out to everyone else when we're finished up here. A lot of these things we don't really do much of anymore because of the method that we're using here, but does anybody have anything from the last meeting that they want to correct or address? And don't everybody speak at once.
Well, I don't have anything.
Okay. All right. So here's the things that we're going to be covering today. We see there's no comments from the last meeting. DMS issues, if there are any. Just cover briefly again, endorsements and ground instruction. The point of contact positions. Hopefully you all got the email stating what the concept was behind that and the individuals that have been selected for it. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. Well, the fun part here is the survey results. I'm going to cover some airworthiness requirements. What I want to try to do in each one of these meetings is take an area of operation and kind of highlight it and go over some things that I can get some input from you all out there on which kind of items are being missed in these, and maybe help the schools and the instructors add some things to their training. Some lost comm issues. You saw Jeff sent out the FAA order 8000.95 alpha. If there are any questions regarding that, I've only read parts of it, but Jeff will take the questions and then get back to us at a later time. So that's how that's going to work on that one there. Once again, the use of mnemonics and acronyms, and that was it. Okay. So endorsements and logging of ground instruction. Have there been any issues? Have we gotten better at seeing that there is ground instruction logged for these check rides? No issues?
If this is Jared, I did have one this week actually that I'm starting to see more of. Wasn't necessarily a right or wrong thing, but electronic endorsements, because the guy had basically electronic logbook for a private. And the endorsement the instructor gave him was electronic, and it had his actual signature on it, but it was all digital. Has there been any guidance or anything from, I guess, the FAA on making sure that that's okay? As long as it looks like a legitimate endorsement with the proper wording, is an electronic endorsement just as good as a paper endorsement?
It has been with me. I haven't had any issues with it, especially since it has the instructor's signature. A lot of times you can actually read it because it is digital. And you can actually see what was written. I'll ask Jeff, do you don't see anything with electronic endorsements being an issue?
No, not that I know of. We sign stuff electronically now, remotely, a lot too. And the fact that there's a certificate number with it, if as long as it's the same format, and it always can be looked up. If there's ever a question, we can look up that certificate number and find out it's not right. But yeah, no, it's no different.
Because half the time you can't even read some of their certificate numbers the way they write or discern a signature. So as far as I know, Jared, that's always worked. It's never been an issue. And the endorsements can be on anything. They don't necessarily have to be specifically in the logbook. A lot of times some of the schools, they'll have a piece of paper, with all the ground items listed on it and a signature at the bottom. So just so you have an endorsement.
Hey, Phil, I remember there being an advisory circular. I just did a quick search. The one that came up is AC 120-78 alpha. So I don't know if it only applies to air carriers being a 120 number, but I just posted the link. You can at least check out that advisory circular.
Regarding?
Electronic signatures, electronic record keeping, and electronic manuals.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Got it.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Any other comments on the endorsements or ground instruction logging?
I've been seeing everyone log in their ground, but I think we agreed that for part 141, we don't necessarily have to go digging for the log ground instruction, right? As long as we see the graduation certificate, that's on the chief to make sure that it was logged properly, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. Jeff, was that what we came up with?
Sounds correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Anyone else with any ground instruction or endorsement issues?
I got one more actually.
Yeah, good.
There's a certain, at a certain school, there's been several commercial applicants who, when I was going through their endorsements, they didn't have a knowledge test endorsement. And they said, oh, I have this course completion email from an online company. And they said, this is what I was told was on I needed to take the written test. And I told them, no, you need to go back and get an actual endorsement to take the knowledge test. Even though they'd already taken it and passed it, there was no actual endorsement because they thought that this course completion certificate, which said nowhere references any regulation, said that they completed the ground school in relation to their commercial pilot certificate, but they had no actual endorsement to take the knowledge test. So I've seen that on a couple different occasions on one of the flight schools up there. And luckily their instructors were there and we worked it out. But these applicants are being told, as long as you have this course completion certificate from an online ground school, that's good enough to take the knowledge test.
Well, that's what the testing centers are accepting then, right? They must be.
They are, because they're taking the test, but don't we still have to see a knowledge test endorsement?
You know, I always wondered about because mostly I've been working with schools that have a regular program, but
Right.
Jeff, how do you see that when they do the King course or a Sporties course? I've usually seen an instructor still make an endorsement in their logbook, but what would the thought process be for someone that just has that certificate?
I'll look it up and get you an official answer, but I mean, those have been around for a while, so I have an assumption, but I'll look it up and get you an official answer.
All right, sounds good.
Phil,
Yes.
what I did with those, you know, they showed me their certificate. Say, see, I've got the certificate. And I said, yeah, but there's no record in your logbook of that training. So I would have them treat it like you would do for a home study. And I had them send, I certify that I did 70, whatever, make up a number, 75 hours of ground training on the subjects found in, and they'd quote all the reg and they would sign it.
Well, okay, I don't know that.
This is,
I don't know
the reference is 6171 for graduates of an approved training program.
No, it's,
Whoops.
so one of the big deals has to do with logging of ground instruction that DPEs run into. Since Phil's out of the airline, she's gotten,
Yeah, I got a
fuzzy.
little
He's
short
looking
here.
like you.
We always do.
Well, maybe not that far.
6171 is the 141, is 141.
I talked to you about Phil. Phil's
Sorry, go ahead.
Phil and are too much alike. Because to be really good friends.
Probably mute him. I think it's unmuted. Rick, whoever Rick.
Such a thing as a short man complex.
Is Rick got his microphone on?
Do I have it on, Phil?
Okay, there you go. All right. We thought you heard you talking to somebody else. All right, let's go back.
I'll mute my mic.
No, you can, yeah, but we just were hearing another conversation.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. So back to our issue here. Jeff's gonna check on that, but I don't think it's been a problem. But to go back to the home study course, anybody that did one of those things did a home study course, unless they actually went to a classroom, right? So those are home study courses, the Sporties and the Kings and the Glimes. So there still needs to be an endorsement from the instructor that said he reviewed the home study course of this student.
Correct.
So that's the endorsement we still need. And Jared, that's if you were dealing with a situation like that, there would still need to be an endorsement by the instructor that he reviewed that home study course, even though the test was already taken, But technically, he still has to make that if that in fact was done.
I agree. And I even like I think it was the King Schools one that I was looking at. You get a course completion certificate, but then they also give them a separate endorsement per the regs that they were authorized to take the knowledge test at that point. Some of the guys didn't have that because it was a different type of course and they didn't have an actual endorsement. So just to cover everything and make sure that they had everything under the advisory circular that covers all those endorsements. I'm expecting them to have a knowledge test endorsement, even if they've already passed the test.
Sure. And looking at 61-123, under the required endorsements, it says an endorsement that the instructor conducted the required ground training or reviewed the person's home study.
Yeah, so he should have one or the other, Jared.
Yep, you don't have to, the instructor doesn't have to teach the material to them. He has to ensure that he has to review that they've got it, but doesn't have to teach it all.
Okay,
Hey, Bill.
yes.
So this also kind of comes full circle in the difference between knowledge areas, studying for aeronautical knowledge areas, which is the home study course material or reviewed with the flight instructor. But there's also, for the gaining of aeronautical experience, required log, ground, and flight training. So each flight training event would assume, based on that verbiage, that there will be associated ground time to go with that, and that should be in the logbook or training record.
Yeah,
This is Bobby, by the way.
Yeah, we went through this before.
Jared, what level of test was it? Commercial, private, instrument?
I believe they were commercial
So, and
applicants.
there's a public document, if you look up training matrix. And I think if that's the case and they didn't have an endorsement, the knowledge test place might be at fault in that case, because it says airman applicant may present one or more of the following acceptable forms of authorization. There's talks about a certificate of graduation or a statement of accomplishing completion of a ground school portion of a course. The certificate or statement may be issued by an FAA certificated pilot school or agency. It doesn't really mention like an online, thing, or a written statement or logbook endorsement from an authorized ground or flight instructor that they have completed the training or reviewed the home study course and is prepared for the knowledge test. So pretty much word for word from the reg. So they would need some sort of endorsement, it sounds like.
Yeah, and in that case, I've always looked for the home study endorsement.
Yeah, that was my whole point. Is they had a course completion, but no endorsement, and I think that's my understanding.
And like I said, as Jeff was reading there, it states that he has to have one or the other. So he either needs to have an endorsement from the instructor that he did the training or that he reviewed the home study course. And along with that, you need to make sure that there was an entry, a ground instruction entry of when they actually did that. So going back to ground instruction being logged to prove that, 103, 5, 7, and 9 were all accomplished. Simply just making the endorsement doesn't cover it. There has to be a reflection of the time that was spent doing that. While there's no minimum time, there still needs to be endorsement said, in his logbook, I've reviewed the home study course, and you should see, along with that, you should see an endorsement, a logbook entry of when they actually did that, January 5th, reviewed home study course, 1 hour, whatever it is. So it's kind of a twofold situation.
So in ballooning, most of the time, what you're going to see is the home study course, because there's only 1 or 2 141 schools in the country for balloons, maybe 3 or 4. But what you'll also see a lot of is a club may conduct a ground school. So you'll get some kind of an endorsement for the ground school. Do you still need to treat that as a home study course, or?
I think listening to this, we're confusing logging of ground training with the endorsement.
Right.
If it's a club situation, I would expect that the instructor teaching the course would give individual endorsements, just as he's your personal instructor, he or she.
Yeah.
It's like, Neil, when I was doing the ground schools for the groups for the double I training, I'd have 3 or 4 II applicants in the room, and I was doing their ground training, and I signed all of their logbooks with the ground training.
Yeah, I just finished writing a ground school for our club, or I'm about 5 hours away from finishing it. And that was my intention. And I know that's what most of the clubs do, but I just wanted to bring it up to see if there was any other thoughts.
Okay. Anyone else? Jared, did we get your question answered? Okay,
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
all right. Okay, that's a new, kind of a new committee or whatever you want to call it here. It was actually thought up by Jim Pittman to kind of help me out a little bit with better communication from so many places since I'm not out there actively yet, and can kind of funnel the stuff through a few individuals. So what we did was just ask for some volunteers and to be point of contacts at different airports or schools. And the whole idea was more or less to get a single person, instead of having these schools get 10 different versions of the same thing, but have a single person that they can channel their questions to or comments to. And then those will get thrown back to the DPEG group via myself, I guess. And hopefully create a good form of communication where there's a little more back and forth without having to ask school having to ask 10 examiners the same question. They can ask the point of contact. Then he or she can bring that information up to the meeting. We can do like we're doing here and come up with an answer, hopefully, and then get it back out to the group, to the schools and the instructors. So that's primarily what that is. And once again, I want to thank those that volunteered for it. And the information that anyone has out there, if you want to just get to the point of contact for that area, may find it a little bit more beneficial than spreading it out a few more people. So any comments on that position or that arena?
Phil, just where we can access the list.
I was just going to send it, but I wanted to ask you first, Phil.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Silence consensus, is that list
Alex?
suitable to share?
Yeah, of course. Is that Alex? Who just asked the question? Well, it doesn't matter. Yes, we're gonna put those out there. So
Yes, sir. That was me. Thank you.
oh, hey, Alex. Like I said, this is brand new, and this is our first meeting with it. So there's really not going to be too much to report from the ladies and gentlemen that are doing that. But yeah, it is definitely going to be put out there so that the individual instructors and the schools are given a name for someone that they can contact, and that person has agreed to volunteering for this, is agreed to be kind of available to answer your questions or at least bring back the information to the DPEG group. So don't feel too bad calling them. That's what they've volunteered to do.
It's an excellent idea. Thank you very much.
You bet. Any other comments regarding the POCs?
So I just put it in the chat. There's a link. Right now, we're just using a tiny.cc link, but feel free to share that with flight school managers, flight instructors, anybody you want.
Sure. Most definitely. Okay, ready to start the survey? I guess so. Here we go. So we did have a couple DPEs from outside the area answer, probably not too many, but got 40 responses to this question. So that's a fair amount of responses for giving the group there. Let's take a look at the first one. Do you require applicants to use coded or plain language text-to-wide data? Now, I sent everyone the actual answers, the optionals. Hopefully everybody got that. That email had the spreadsheet version of it. And what I did here, just I don't want to go through each one of these piece by piece, but the whole idea here was to present you with a pie chart view of that without having to read all the text. It's just to kind of see where we fell into place here. So we see that either coded or plain language is fine, which I think is great because the venues that we use that are FAA approved provide the plain language as well as coded. Does anyone have any comments regarding this question? Nope. Okay. Do you require encourage touch and goes during practical tests? The majority said it depends, and some of those answers are going to be on what type of landing was being done, where they were operating at. It was fairly split up there. We just have the obviously the green part is those not applicable to the test, but was kind of spread out there. So
well, it is interesting to see the split between the absolute yeses and the absolute nos,
Yeah.
almost a quarter each. So
yeah, and once again, there's not necessarily any right or wrong answers here. What we're trying to do is just kind of get the word out there that you know, these are the thought processes of the group, and it's not necessarily that anything's right or wrong. We're just trying to see where everybody falls into the into what might be the norm or the preferred methods. Any comments on this one?
I think in general, it's important to remind everyone, part of the reason you wanted to do this survey, first of all, you were getting a lot of these questions that you wanted to present to the group. That's, I think, where it started. But I think that a big benefit of this is to start discussions to help us differentiate between absolutes from the FAA versus technique and opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And there are plenty of things that I have, you know, just like every DPE, speaking for myself, I have opinions on how things should be taught. I have opinions on how things should be or should not be done, but that doesn't mean I should pass or fail a check ride based on those opinions. And what we're hoping to do with this survey is to come up with things that we need to talk about where check rides are either being passed when they should not, or they're being failed when they should not, based on opinion. And that's where we're trying to differentiate. So,
yeah, thanks. Okay, do you unsat an applicant if they do not retract the flaps during ground roll of a short field landing? Actually, we had very small group there saying yes. No, never. Of course, it depends, which is going to be a big chunk of a lot of these surveys because there are so many variables in those right there. But kind of good to see that it does depend. It depends on, you know, the aircraft, the requirements of the manufacturer, the situation, location. Things like Bonanzas were never set up to retract flaps on short field landings. I think it might have been because of the proximity of the flap switch with the gear switch, but that was Beechcraft's particular procedure for that. Any comments on this one?
was everyone able to get the text detailed answers that Phil sent out? I know it was a little bit strange the way it attached as a Google sheet to your email, Phil, but at least the 26 people that are here, was anyone not able to get the ant survey results that he sent out, the answers?
Yeah, mine would never open up. It never lined up, so it didn't look like, this is Bobby. It didn't look like a matrix or a spreadsheet. It was skewed out, and I don't know why that happened. I just have Apple products, so I don't know.
Were you on a tablet, a phone, or a desktop?
Tablet.
All right. If you're able to try it on a computer, I'd be curious to know.
Okay, I'll have access to a computer.
No hurry.
That'll be a couple of days for that. Yeah, I'll let you know on that. I'll try it on a different platform.
All right, thanks.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. No, it's like, well, that's kind of feedback we want, make it easy for you guys to read this stuff when we send it out.
Okay. Let's see, the unsatisfied applicant, if they do not follow manufacturer recommended speeds for maneuvers, kind of split up there. And once again, the it depends was a larger group, which I kind of figured it would be on these. And like I said, the explanations, which are the important part of that 73%, is to see what the reasons were for yes or knowing. And that's the part I like the best about it, was not necessarily a definitive answer with a lot of the stuff that we do, because as we know, there's so much subjectivity in things like how many times can they exceed the tolerances before you call it. You know, it's not stated that if they go over 100 feet, more than 100 feet one time, that's the end of the program. You're looking at the big picture as well. So any comments on this one? Oh, okay. Do you allow applicants to reference navigation and or weather chart legends during practical tests? Yes, always. No, never. And it's interesting. Actually, no one said no. I thought that was actually pretty good because the concept of the legend, obviously, I can tell you some of the depends were, well, is this person looking everything up, or did they need to look up one thing? So once again, that's why the depends is a larger, I mean, almost half as much as the yes always. But that's pretty much the way I thought that one was going to go. Any comments on this one? All right. On instrument tests, do you work the actual comm radios and simulate realistic instrument radio calls with the applicant during the flight? Yes, always. No, never, of course. And we had a couple not applicable, but 59% or 57% said it depends. Once again, those explanations are in the spreadsheet arena that Jim made up. So those would be in there. But it's kind of what I thought might would be the result of that one. Any comments on this one? You require or encourage applicants to work the actual radios when in the Stanfield stack. So no, never was the biggest one, which I think it's a good idea. The stack is not normal. It's not real world. It's a whole nother type of communications. They're not looking out the window. They're under the hood and basically would just be listening to what the DPE would be giving them for their ATC clearances. Any comments on this one?
I think it's important to point out that most of the "it depends" we're referring to double I check rides. So that's obviously appropriate for a double I applicant to be working the radios.
Oh yeah, thanks, Jim. I just got that here in my notes, and that's where most of those came from. Is we have to see that individual being a double I. So that means talking, looking, and evaluating or training.
Now you said most of those came from double I. Do the people that said depends and did not talk about double I, did they get feedback on this? Because those students should not be making calls.
No, they shouldn't be. Once again, on the, I'll refer to Jim on this. On the it depends, we have answers for those, don't we, Jim, in that spreadsheet?
Well, so
for those
Stacy,
that answered.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, Stacy, this was a completely anonymous survey, so we don't know who gave which answers. So this is not a coaching tool for individuals. Also, the it depends or the next question after that was basically optional. So the survey did not require them. There might be a few people that said it depends and then they left the next part blank. So we don't really know what they meant. But most of the comments, as I remember looking at it, were about the double I. I think if there's anyone out there that's making instrument applicants talk on the radio at Stanfield, I just have to hope that that's a past problem and we're past that.
Thanks, Jim.
Yes, most definitely. Thanks, Stacy. Any other comments regarding this one? Okay, when testing an ILS or LPV approach, do you unset an applicant that goes slightly below the DA while executing the missed approach? I was really happy to see this.
I think that was a one bad apple question of how we ended up with that one. But you know, it was good to put it out there just to check that we're all on the same page.
Yep. Of course, there are variations. You know, where did the person recognize the missed approach, and you know, what else was going on at the same time? But it was pretty good response on that one. Any other comments on this one? Well, I think that was the last one. No, one more. Here we go. Okay, when evaluating one of these applicants on required equipment, which of the following do you prefer? So The big one here was you provide a specific scenario and the applicant is able to correctly work there. I can't remember what the rest of it was. Do you remember, Jim?
Work their way to a successful conclusion, something like
That was something like that. Okay. Yeah. What I do, and then we got the little small comment down there, a combination of both B and C.
Yeah, this was one where they could make their own answer. So
Right.
that's what that one was.
I'm going to discuss this here in a little bit when we get to airworthiness. Anyone have any comments regarding this question? Okay, moving on. Airworthiness requirements. Okay, well, here we go. The use of a mnemonic demonstrates the rote level of knowledge. Would we all agree that that's the rote level of knowledge? Does anyone disagree? Okay. Read the entire regulation, i.e. ELT, landing light, flotation gear, etc. What I was getting, and I just did again the other day with a CFI applicant, was the A-tomato flames thing. And he mentioned, I said, you're a private pilot and you're teaching a private student what requirement is required. And of course, he went through the whole thing of covering the ELT, landing light, flotation gear. And why am I saying that? Anybody know why I'm bringing up the landing light?
For hire.
There you go. They don't read the for hire part. Because I'll fail the landing light and he thinks he can't go. Okay. Or she, whoever it is. What about flotation gear?
Glide distance.
Okay, private pilot. Does anybody remember what it says in 91-205 regarding flotation gear?
Got to have it out over the water.
3 nautical miles offshore.
How many? 3?
Isn't it within gliding distance?
What's that?
Isn't it within gliding distance?
We're almost there.
Well, of course, it depends if it's commercial operations or not, but long as we're, getting detailed here, don't forget the part in 91.213D that specifically says that it's ultimately up to the pilot in command. So on any of these, a savvy applicant would say, as the pilot in command, I want everything working. So there, now it's legal.
He may. He doesn't have to say that. He can, what I'm asking him is a private pilot. The flotation gear and the pyrotechnic device are for hire, beyond gliding distance to land. If you're flying over water, for hire, beyond gliding distance to land. The point that I'm trying to make, and ELT, everybody thinks you have an ELT. Does anyone realize you don't have to have an ELT? Does anyone?
Correct. You don't have to have it if you're, was it within 25 nautical miles of your point of destination or your point of departure?
Yeah, almost 50. It's 50.
50. Yeah, I couldn't remember which one.
But once again, the concept is thought of that all these things have to be spouted off with their mnemonics. And I would say, well, do you really need that stuff? So the point I'm trying to make is, let's try to be a little bit more realistic with this. The private pilot doesn't need a landing light. The private pilot doesn't need flotation gear. Unless he wants them, of course, he can have that stuff. But he is perfectly legal to not have those elements. And the ELT is, with all the airplanes around here got them because they go more than 50 miles away from their home airport. So that's really a non-issue. So altitude engine. Does anyone ever ask their applicant what's meant by an altitude engine? So once again, they say manifold pressure, right? When they read their little mnemonic off to you. The 172 have manifold pressure gauge? Don't everybody answer at once?
No, it does not.
Okay. Does it have to have one?
No, it does not.
No, it doesn't. So once again, we have the road level going on there. They don't really understand what they don't even know what an altitude engine is. If I ask them, they don't even know what it is. At the private level, a commercial guy may by this time have gotten into turbocharging and has an idea what it is. Here's one of my favorite ones. This is where Joe Satilli tells me I have way too much time on my hands being retired. So we're supposed to carry fuses, right? Right?
If you have a fused airplane, yes.
Well, almost. Look at that last part of that. Accessible to the pilot. This is the part, once again, that everybody misses. So a couple things come from this one, come out of this one. One of them is fuses, and I've actually had applicants tell me they need extra circuit breakers since the airplane doesn't have fuses. They actually say that because it's just they're memorizing this. They're not really paying attention to the concept of what this is. So I asked you a question. What's a pilot supposed to do with a fuse if he has a fuse accessible to him? What's the intent? Anybody want to say replace it?
Once.
One? Okay.
You can replace it once, I think.
You what?
You can replace it once. If it blows again, it's just like the breaker popping.
Well, does the pilot know that? I'd never heard that before. So here's my question. What gives the pilot the authority to replace a fuse? Anybody know?
They're also a mechanic.
What's that?
If they're also a mechanic,
Yeah, if they're also a mechanic, but it's not under preventive maintenance. Fuses isn't in there. Most people will tell me I can do that because part 43 says I can, Appendix A. Now, the only thing electrically you can do is replace a bulb or check a landing light circuit. But anyway, once again, see if we can, obviously, you know, you're going to make the calls on this stuff as you see fit, but maybe in the debriefing of some of these, spend a little bit of time with what the regulation really states for required equipment, as opposed to just following the mnemonic. Okay, can we exceed our 100 hours by 10 hours on an airplane that's under a 100-hour inspection? I kind of gave you the answer there already.
For purposes of bringing it home.
Maybe.
Yeah, it depends on the other inspections.
There you go.
If your seatbelt AD was done at the last 100-hour, no, you can't.
I have seen some ADs do go to 110 hours, I think, for this reason, but not all of them. You got to be careful.
Well, Piper actually did go to 110 hours on their fuel injection AD on the Arrows. They went to 110. So you could overfly that 10 hours. But once again, in the process of debriefing, because I know everybody's getting the same answer, I can exceed 100 hours by 10 hours to get it to a place to fix it. That's not necessarily true. If you have the seat rail AD for the Cessnas, they have to be done every 100 hours. So as long as you get the seat rail done and you're off base there, you get a mechanic to do it, you can go ahead and fly it back to your maintenance base. Any questions on that? Nope. Okay, these are the areas that I used to see a lot earlier. Lately when I was doing these, the CFI training was just the rote memorization of what they thought, what they've been told. Does anyone ever cover type certificate data sheets when you talk about the legality of the equipment on the aircraft?
Usually in operative equipment.
Okay. So if the airplane, if they just memorize 91205, is that airplane a legal airplane?
It's still got to meet type design.
There we go. The majority of the applicants do not know about the type certificate data sheets. So once again, maybe in our travels as we debrief, might be a good idea to actually cover that as part of the airworthiness requirements as we debrief on those things there. Any other, yeah.
I have seen a significant, or at least a noticeable improvement in the last year. Most of my applicants, even private applicants, they're bringing it up before I do.
Well, that's good. That's good. You got to remember that there, unless there's certain schools that are good about making sure the applicants, students have access to the maintenance records more often than others. And then there's some, especially a lot with the freelance individuals who aren't working out of a hangar and don't have access to the manuals, that a lot of times these students have only seen these things once or twice, and usually once the day before the check ride, right? Unfortunately, that's what happens. And I tell them, I said, who was responsible for making sure the airplane was airworthy, maintained in airworthy condition? Well, the owner operator. Okay. Who's responsible for determining it's in a safe condition for flight? Well, the pilot in command. Well, how'd you do that? Well, I looked at the maintenance records and did a pre-flight. How many times did you look at the maintenance records before you flew the airplane? So we want to emphasize a little bit more that they should have access to these records sooner than later. Any questions on the rest of this? Oh, go ahead.
I'll just echo real quick what Jim said. I've seen a lot of applicants mention the type certificates as well. And then a couple times I've asked them, have you ever seen one, or do you know where to find those? And I get the deer in the headlights look, because I think they've memorized that list of things that they're supposed to go over if they have in-opera equipment. But most of them, like you said, have never seen it. So
Sure.
they'll spit it back, but very few have ever actually seen or know what to do with any of those things. So
Yeah, that's pretty much it. They may know the term. The one thing that I did leave off of there was the MEL. I'm aware of the fact that, you know, that's, people want to say it's a big airplane concept. I actually have an MEL for my 182. It's just easier. If anything breaks, all I got to do is look at that, put a sticker on it, and go on my way. I don't have to look at 5 different places. But want to make sure that they truly understand that, because the MEL is on, you know, all the airworthiness portions of these check rides. So one question I'll ask them is, if something is broken and you cannot find it in the MEL, are you legal to go? 8 out of 10 times they'll say, yes, I can. They don't understand the concept of the MEL, that if it's not in there, you can't go. So want to once again make sure they have a fully better understanding of what's going on with those. Any other questions regarding airworthiness, or anything anybody's seen out there that they want to discuss regarding airworthiness task? Nope. Okay. Lost comm. So are we pretty good about letting them know that before they give me the Avenue F MEA concept, when you lose the radio on a departure or on an arrival, that there are lost comm notes on those approach plates, or the stars, or the SIDS rather? Is anyone concentrating on any of those areas right there, instead of just accepting a you know, the mnemonic for what they would do?
I don't have them do that, but what I actually usually do is give them a scenario where they're still in VMC conditions and they're not yet in IMC conditions, and see if they recognize that the first step they're supposed to do is, if they're in VMC or find VMC, stay there instead of going through their mnemonic like you said. Everybody memorizes that. But the first part of that is, what happens if you're in VMC conditions and this happens? And a lot of applicants forget that, or have to go back and look at it.
Yeah, well, they just get locked into the thinking they're IMC when they get asked that question. Yeah. So anyway, once again, just something to bring to their attention if they haven't picked up on it, that there are lost comm procedures on a lot of these DPs and stars. They're not taught that very much, at least in my experience with the II applicants. Is a lot of that was news to them. They didn't even realize that there was any verbiage for how to follow it. Any questions on that? Okay. Is lost comm an emergency?
Yes.
If you make it one.
Yeah, if you make it one. Okay.
Well, are you IFR in IMC conditions?
Okay, here we go with it depends. The reason I brought this up is I got asked this question, well, a lot in the past year or so. Do y'all remember the letter? I don't remember if Jeff, if you got that for us, but there was a lost comm letter that came from FAA legal that stated it is not an emergency to lose lose your radios. Do you remember that, Jeff?
No, it wasn't me.
Okay, there's a letter out there, and actually now I think about it, I think it came from Adam Silva. I think he's the one that, I have to see if he can track that down. Well, the FAA's interpretation was, from that letter, was that it was not an emergency. But we have another issue here. We have the FAA not talking to the other part of the FAA. So under the area of operation, what's the title? Emergency operations, right? For lost comm? Emergency operations. And then we have a statement in the AIM. Let me pull it up here. Whoops. There it is right there. That's right out of the AIM. Whether two-way communications failure constitutes an emergency depends on the circumstances. And in any event, it is determination made by the pilot, 14 CFR, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So they get three different versions of how people want to interpret this. The reason I bring it up is because our group has determined a yay or nay on some of these based on how this was answered. So me personally, I'd like for them to know the procedures for 91-185, but also realistically, if that individual says, well, this is what I might be able to do, this is the route I would take, this is the altitude I would choose, I also have the option of declaring an emergency and doing whatever I want, for lack of better words. So that's why that was brought up.
Bill, I don't have that letter handy. I only vaguely remember it, but my hope would be that when they said it's not an emergency, they weren't saying it can't be an emergency. They're just saying that in and of itself, it's not always an emergency.
Well, it used the harsh word is not to be considered as an emergency. And I have to get that letter, but it was, we got that letter and went, wow, we can't, they're saying no.
Yeah,
it can't be, but yet
anything can be an emergency. PIC says it's emergency. It's an emergency.
Well, the problem was that when that letter came out, it was now determined that if the person said that they wanted to follow that policy, that was not going to be acceptable. So
If
anyway.
the FAA's philosophy is that it's not an emergency, I think back to 1973 when I was working on an instrument rating. Part of the simulating of lost comm was you'd squawk 7,700 for, I forgot the time, 1 minute, then 76 for 15 minutes or something. And you had to keep switching back and forth. And I remember the instructor teaching that as the first minute you're saying, I have an emergency, it's a radio failure, radio failure. I have an emergency, it's a radio failure, you know. But they did away with that whole process. Thank goodness.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I knew guys that failed their instrument check ride because they were off by a minute on their squawk. They squawked 77 for 2 minutes instead of 1.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, we don't have that issue right now. And as I said, under the instrument ACS, it's actually under emergency procedures.
So Phil, one thing that I think this group's good for is, helping us determine what items to emphasize maybe more than others and which ones to emphasize less. And it's in the ACS. We're required to test it. It's an important item. Just to add a little bit of reality to this, I haven't searched the NTSB specifically for this recently, but I did recently hear a podcast, the one where Max Trescott interviewed a controller, and they were talking about lost comms. And, basically from this guy's decades of experience, just about every time there was a real lost comm, it was simply because the pilot missed a handoff. It was, they put in the wrong frequency, that kind of thing. And yes, we need to test that they know 91-185. And I think maybe even more applicable to that is we need to use, as DPs, in my opinion, we need to use scenarios that get them just thinking, oh, well, why did I lose comms? Let's really focus on that, because that's really where reality is these days. Most airplanes have more than one radio, and to have a realistic scenario where you're going to lose the ability to communicate while still having the ability to navigate in the clouds,
It's rare.
it's tough to come up with something realistic.
Well,
Had it happen in heavy rain.
say that again.
Had it happen in heavy rain.
For more than a few minutes.
Oh yeah, all the way into Cleveland, shot the approach, no comm.
Wow.
And I did the 77, 76, so they knew I was coming. I told them on the ground, but I kept my nav and I kept the transponder, but it knocked out. There was so much rain coming in the radio rack, it knocked out the comm radios, which was in those days a separate unit, you know.
Interesting.
And it worked. And of course, I got on the ground, and then my radios worked because the rain wasn't pouring in anymore. It was old C-46.
Okay, from now on, no check rides in C-46s.
That solves it.
There,
in the rain at night.
So you see, my next bullet point there was, do you test this on the oral portion or the flight portion of the flight test? I'll throw my 2 cents in here first. We've all sat down there with a little chart in front of us or the iPad or whatever, and had the person run off their Avenue FMEA mnemonic and get all the answers right. I did that in the early days, and then I started changing it to doing it in the flight portion. If we look at where it's located in the ACS, if that matters, it's actually in the flight portion of the test. It's up there with all the approaches and everything. So what happened is that they could sit there on the ground and tell me all these things, and I would send them down Victor 105 out of Chandler and give them a radar vector off the airway and say, I'll have you back on course in about 2 minutes for Stanfield. You know, I need you to fly heading 220 for traffic. I'll have you back on course in 2 minutes, which is what the controllers are supposed to say. We know they're not real good about saying when they're going to have you back on course or how long the vector's for, which they are aware of is not really kosher, because part of what we're looking at is, you know, what was the expected time to head back to our point. They can't comprehend that in the airplane. So it's one of those things that they can sit there and rattle off in the classroom, but can't seem to apply it in the flight portion of the test. The other thing that I will do is in the holding pattern, I give them an EFC that's kind of realistic with how many turns I need to see to figure out if they got the hold figured out. And once again, be quiet. So they'll turn and look at me sometimes. What are you looking at me for? Oh, okay. Well, they don't realize that there is actually a way to test this in flight as opposed to just sitting at the table. So I think, I don't know how many of you do it that way, but you'll find that if you're not testing it in the flight portion, you might be surprised at how many really don't know to comply with it or how to comply with it in the actual flight portion of the test. Now, along those lines, Jim had mentioned, you know, getting the radios back. So reestablishing communications here, as I bring up the area of operation here, the task, we see that one of the items to be tested on is what? Reestablishing communications, right? So are we doing that? Are we making any attempt to see if they can figure out how to get the radios back? Did they pick a wrong frequency? Did they, you see right there at VIIA.S2 is simulate actions to reestablish communication. So it's another thing that we can throw in there other than the normal, you know, be quiet and the Avenue FMEA concept. So because even though Russ, that had happened to you, I would think that if this did happen in flight, and I agree with Jim, the odds of you actually having radios, your nav radios or comm radios go out and still have your nav radios is rare, but they are different antennas. So that is possible. But realistically, what do we think might be a reason that they went lost comm other than losing a frequency? Anybody have any idea how to present a scenario for that?
One that I use sometimes is early in the check ride when we're talking about inoperative equipment, I'll give them a scenario where one radio has been, comm radio has been deactivated by maintenance, all the paperwork's done, it's legal. And, you know, we talk about whether it's legal to fly with one radio. Fortunately, most of the applicants say, yeah, it's legal, but I don't want to do that. You know, I'm not going to take that airplane in IMC. Like, okay, good. And then later when we're talking about lost comms, I'll give them a scenario where the scenario is you had a bad day of judgment and you took that airplane we talked about earlier that only has one radio. So, you know, they kind of see where it's going. But the only other one, it's not likely, I've never even heard of it, but it is possible in a 172 to have a bird strike in just the wrong way where you lose both comm antennas and not any nav antennas. So sometimes when I want to have fun, I'll give them the bird strike scenario, but then they got to go right into the clouds because what birds are going to be flying around in the clouds? It's just, I'm telling you, it's almost impossible to make this realistic.
Well, can anyone else think of another way to simulate a realistic simulation of a lost comm?
Easy. How about microphone failure or a stuck mic button?
That's one. That's another one. Any more?
I guess you could start with a circuit breaker or your alternator failure, which could then progress into total electrical failure.
That's a different scenario because now you don't have nav.
True, but we're not there yet. I'm trying to give them, once again, just like you said, Jim, that is a realistic scenario. And even though they don't have nav, the concept is for them to try to figure out why did they lose the radios.
Oh, no, absolutely. I'm just saying 91.185 is out the window when you're in the clouds without navigation.
It is. My point was trying to reestablish communications. So what are some ways we can do that? There was one right there. We have a checklist for a lost alternator, don't we? Normally it says to turn the master switch or alternator switch off. Wait a few seconds and turn it back on. So my point is that we spend all this time with them actually losing the radios and they just go for it. There's very little attempts to actually try to reestablish communications. So looking at S2 there, you know, are we testing them on, do they know how to try to reestablish communications and not accept the fact that just because the DPE said you lost your radios, they make no attempt to try to get them back.
I would like to see more applicants talk about using cell phones, specifically texting. A lot of them don't seem like they've really thought about that. Sometimes I bring that up as a debrief item. That a lot of times you can't make a phone call, it won't connect, but you can text someone. And or who would you text? You know, your mom is probably not the best answer.
Sure.
But there are people you could text that could communicate with center on your behalf that could get you out of a situation.
You text Phil.
There you go.
Yeah,
He's,
there you
he's
go.
home.
That's it. But anyway, I was looking for some input on the lost comm process and any tips or best practices that anybody has for running this this part of the check right.
Carrie just posted in the chat, different topic, but ATC 0. And you know, it's happening more and more. I think that's appropriate for us to start testing on.
Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Carrie.
Any other comments? Recommendations?
When you're testing a private pilot on a radio failure, who's obviously flying in VFR and most likely daylight, do you want to see them attempt to put it on the ground at an untowered field rather than diagnose the problem in flight?
Well, this loss of communications isn't on the private pilot test. The only thing that you might have on there is how would they deal with light gun signals if they did have a loss of communications. But this particular task, as you see it right here, is only on the instrument.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, in regards to that, I have given them a scenario in flight where I said, we're heading back to Chandler and it appears that the radios aren't working. I had to kind of, you know, force the issue. And the first thing they went for was, well, I guess I'll use light gun signals. Can anybody else think of another option for that scenario?
Well, you could land at Casa Grande and call the tower on the phone.
There we go. Nobody ever says they are committed to going back to the Tower Airport. I don't know what it is, but once again, the rote level of learning was, well, I'll use light gun signals. Instead of, wait a minute, maybe there's another way to handle this problem. Maybe I go to Ak-Chin or Casa Grande or Stellar and make a phone call and state, hey, listen, I don't have any radios and I want to come into the area, and this is who I am and what my N number is, and so on and so forth. That was my point behind that, was to get away from the rote memorized answer to these questions is, oh, I'll use light gun signals.
Hey, Phil, I got a quick question, just since
Yeah.
I've got a room full of smart people here. I haven't cared enough to look this up. So recently I've had several applicants, either private or commercial, that were in a scenario where they did decide to go back to a towered airport. So light gun signals are in play. And they said they would remain outside of the Delta until they get the tower's attention, start getting light gun signals. I don't remember that ever being a thing. Like I've heard it taught about, staying out of the pattern, maybe staying above the pattern, but is there anything in the AIM, or does anyone know of any reference that says you're supposed to or should stay out of Delta when you're LOSCOM, VFR, VMC?
Anyone want to answer that?
I don't know of anything.
Yeah, so the PHAC used to talk about how it was altitude above the traffic pattern altitude, and now it talks about remaining outside of the airspace.
So it's in the PHAC. Interesting. Thank you, Alex.
So that's one of the references. This is something I've been talking about with my airmen at ATP as well, because how you'll see the light gun signals.
Yeah, they're not going to shoot them through the roof.
Yeah, that is an anomaly that I don't know why they came up with that, but because it's logistically going to be very difficult. You're expecting, let's take Chandler, for example, you're expecting Chandler to notice that somebody is outside the Delta airspace trying to get their attention. Probably not.
There's people outside the Delta over Chandler all the time.
Probably not going to happen. So, all you can do, once again, if the pilot feels that, even the VFR pilot feels that having those radios not working is an emergency, he or she decides to go into the airspace and, appropriately follows the light gun signals. And for anybody asks them why, which I don't think they would. Well, I was in a situation where maybe you didn't have enough gas to fool around out there. And I felt the need to come back in, but yeah, that's a tough one.
It looks like Captain Bob got the answer, man. You're fast. 4-2-13 in the AIM. Remain outside or above the class Delta until the direction and flow of traffic has been determined. Okay. Yeah, I'll go read that in detail. Thank you, Bob.
I question how practical that really is. I mean, 4 miles away, are you really going to see a light gun signal from that distance?
Or above 2,500 feet.
I've had a radio failure myself at returning to a towered field, and which was quite busy, and I didn't have a problem entering the pattern. I just did it slowly and kept myself high and eyes on the tower, knowing where to look on the field for the tower, and got the light gun signals. So I don't know about how practical this is to stay outside of Delta.
There's a couple ones here that Paul brought up here was along these lines of reestablishing communication. One of the things that I know is not taught anywhere is the concept of whether you're transmitting or not, or receiving or not. And that portion of the radios nowadays, I mean, in the older Cessna radios and stuff I know, and the KX-170s, you couldn't tell. But with what we have nowadays, it would, I think, be a benefit, if not taught by the instructor, that maybe at the end of these check rides, when you have a chance to talk about some things, is, did you even know that you actually were transmitting because you had the TX showing in the window? You just weren't receiving. And they go, no, I didn't. how'd you know that? Well, and I pointed out to them. So one of the other things that I think we can do obviously we can't be telling them this stuff while they're dealing with it, lost comm, but I think it would be beneficial to the group. So hopefully they would take that back. And once again, these are the other things that the point of contacts can do too, is we have these meetings here and like, Jim and the others that are doing this is go back and say, hey, listen, here's something you might want to throw into the training program that we discussed at a meeting the other day, was knowing whether or not your radio is even transmitting or receiving, because you have that capability. So thanks, Paul, for that one. So, and he made his point here was that with an alternator failure, I don't know how many people know that it takes more electricity to transmit than it does to receive. So if you're low on electricity, try to limit those transmissions, because every time you key that mic, it drains the electrical system. Let me just go through a couple of these. Let's see if there's anything else on the chats here. We got the 4-2-13. And once again, good luck with trying to get the light gun signals. I've had my students get them when we've actually been in the pattern so they could see what they look like. But might be interesting one day to see if the towers, probably Chandler, because they're kind of out of everybody's way down here, to see if they could give you a light gun signal and see how well you could see it from outside the Delta airspace. Okay. Any other comments on that?
Along those lines, when discussing perhaps in an oral with, how to plan for a cross-country flight, I know I always emphasize to my students that when you're going to a towered field, especially one you haven't been to before, locate that tower on the airport so you know where to look for those light gun signals. Otherwise, you might not know where to look and could be missing something that's being aimed at you.
Yeah, that's good. I think we have a lot more that we can do with lost comm than other than our Avenue FMEA concept. I think there's a lot more to look at here as we look at the difference, just looking at the task itself and the variations on it. I know that we're only really required to talk about one of those items in each there, but I think it might be beneficial to cover some of these things, at least if not on the test itself, if you've gotten what you wanted out of it, but on the debriefs to maybe throw into exactly what we're talking about right here, that there's a little bit more to it than just that mnemonic.
Hey, Phil,
Yes.
one last comment on that topic. When I am doing an instrument check ride and we do end up in a scenario where they shot an instrument approach, they came out of the clouds and they landed lost comm, I'll typically give them light gun scenarios then. Just as you touch down, you glance at the tower, you see such and such lights, what are you going to do? And I don't mean for it to be a gotcha kind of question, but apparently on an instrument check ride, the last thing they were expecting to be asked was light gun signals.
Yeah.
And I think that is a completely appropriate, realistic scenario. So
Sure.
Whatever others, I know you usually have a point in this meeting, you ask for a scenario triggers. So there's one for you.
Especially on the ground.
One of the scenarios I used to do with instrument students, just an occasional thing when they're trying to reestablish communication. I'm playing ATC and I issue them an instruction and they respond back, or they'll ask me something. And so to simulate that they're receiving but not transmitting, I'll do what Seattle Center did looking for November 3 Romeo Bravo the other day. I said, if you're receiving air traffic control, squawk IDIM. So now they know that you can hear them, they can't talk to you, and you can just work with it that way. It's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. They're not expecting that either.
Right. Also, another question that I ask them on the instrument check ride is, are you guaranteed by flying the MEA, are you guaranteed communications all along your route? And most of them say yes, because that's what they think. They think the MEA also gives them communications, and it's a news to them that no, it doesn't guarantee you communications. It only guarantees you navigation.
It's a common misconception.
Yeah, it is. And once again, this is the reason for adding the POCs to this, is that Jim and the others will bring this stuff out as they chat with these schools and say, here's some other things you may want to throw into your mix with the training. Great stuff. Anything else on this? Oh, okay. All right. Everybody got the notice from Jeff that there's an FAA order 8000.95A. I've only read portions of it. Does anyone have any questions for Jeff regarding this document?
Silence.
Yep, of course. Probably it's obviously.
That's not a bad thing. I don't mind silence.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't. But anyway, if you do, the venue for that will be just to contact Jeff by email or by phone, and he will find the answers to those questions that you may have. So we didn't really expect too much.
Just a reminder for those that have DPE admin privileges, so military comp, foreign pilot, remote pilot, what else is there? Flight instructor renewals, whatever. There's that new requirement to have. There's an additional online training course for that. So I sent the email to those specific people. If you don't have admin privileges or ACR privileges, then you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. Let's see. I've already covered most of that stuff right there, and that was kind of left over from the last concept here. Oh yeah, I know what he's going to cover. One of the things that I noticed in the training is that the words at and above, at and below, more than, less than, are not really acknowledged or referenced by the applicants. So they'll tell me that they have to have DME for the instrument requirements above flight level 240. What's actually at and above. The weather for their famous 1, 2, 3 rule. They'll say, well, I need hour before, hour after 2003. So what's a 2003? Well, that's the ceiling and visibility. Well, what? More than, less than, equal to? And that's where it stops right there. They didn't know whether it was more than or less than or equal to. So one of the things that we might want to throw in there when we are hearing these rotely responses is to ask them, well, what exactly does that mean? Now, what is it you're really looking for? What I do in that case is I give them the weather. Well, I give them the weather at 2002 miles and see if they figured out that it's got to be both of them. But anyway, that was the point behind the using the mnemonics and so on, is make sure they actually understand if something is at or above, at or below, more than, less than. And the other most commonly missed one is the 10,000 feet. Well, above 10,000 feet, the speed limit is, or the cloud clearances are. Below 10,000 feet, the speed limit is and the cloud clearances are in echo airspace, for example. So what did we miss?
10,000 feet.
Yes, there you go. And I'll ask them that. And then I get the famous deer in the headlights look. Oh, that's not how I learned it. So just food for thought. Any comments on that? Okay. Any issues or problems that anyone, the DPEs want to chat about? I'll get to the guests here in a minute.
I had one, I was able to get on the end of the AFTW meeting and share with them. Looked like they had, I'm at training in Salt Lake right now, hence the hotel room behind me. But I was just able to catch the end of the AFTW meeting and they had like 50 some people on, I think I saw. It was great. But at Deer Valley, those of you that have been there since the new taxiway went in, you know that there's they moved the hold short lines farther away from the runway center line on 7 right, 25 left. And it makes it difficult, if not impossible, to come from the run-up area at 7 right or 25 left and turn the airplane to be able to see traffic on final before crossing the hold short line. One, I'm curious if other DPs have witnessed this and see it as an issue. Most of what I've noticed is the applicants are mostly giving up, or they just kind of give a cursory glance and, they're in a high wing Cessna, the wings covering their views. Like, how are you guys checking final? So the only solution that I can see, especially in a high wing airplane, is after getting cleared onto the runway to turn the airplane physically to be able to check base and final. I've seen it so much, I'm making it part of my pre-flight briefing when we talked to them about their responsibilities and whatnot for the check ride. So.
Okay.
Anybody want to chime in? Has anyone else noticed that, or is it just me?
Haven't seen it. Haven't been there.
Yeah.
Okay. No other issues or problems then? Okay. Anything procedural that anyone wants to discuss? Have any procedures changed in the area? Approaches? You just mentioned one there, Jim, about the changing of the hold short lines. Anything else? Okay.
Well,
Yes.
So real quick, I'll just mention I was on that meeting too with the safety group, and they're talking about making amendments to the FTW website about the approaches at Coolidge, and creating more staff procedures basically for the GPS 2-3 at Coolidge. So I think, if you're using those approaches, everybody should be familiar with them and check the website to make sure we're all doing it the same way. I brought up the fact that I've had a couple issues doing the VOR approach into Coolidge, the people cutting me off from the practice area. We're going to, I think, hopefully find a way to standardize that approach a little bit more so people are initiating the approach from the same spot, so we don't create traffic conflicts with multiple aircraft flying that approach at the same time. Just something people should check the website when they're going to update it, I think, here shortly. But just note that there are more standardized procedures coming out for those approaches into Coolidge.
Okay.
Yeah, they should be having a post with the procedure for a draft that'll be open for comment, just like Carrie just commented. So if you all have time to take a look at it, that would be really helpful for us that are trying to develop it.
Anything else? Nope. Okay. Anything, we just discussed some of the stuff, airports. I don't know of any new FAA pubs coming out. Does anyone know of any? Okay. Anything from the professional standpoint that that's probably not where we're going to discuss this year anyway. I would probably need to take that out and just leave that for something that's not.
Oh, Phil, you don't want to share the soap operas with us?
No. Are you kidding? That's okay. Okay, best practices, plan of actions. Anybody have any more comments on the DPEs, on any best practices they like to incorporate or pass on to anybody else, or any other scenario triggers? And also any feedback from the schools on anything you want to bring up at this point? This reminds me of my first attempt at stand-up comedy. Whew.
I think it's worth pointing out that, it's probably different for CFI and multi-engine, but at least for private instrument commercial, there doesn't seem to be much of a waiting list for applicants that need a check ride.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big deal compared to just 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, there's definitely been a drop off in a lot of that stuff. My CFI ground schools enrollments have dropped way off too. There's not a job for them out there right now, so it's not a priority. We don't really have any mentoring going on right now. So this here is, I brought this up a couple months back. This is in the airplane flying handbook, and it's just a list of malfunctions, causes, and corrective actions. So if anyone's looking for kind of a guide for the kind of things that you can throw out there other than the standard engine failure, alternator failure stuff, here's some more things that you can take a look at here and or hand out to the schools for their training. So this is in the airplane flying handbook. I think it's under emergency operations. Okay, committees, which I think I'm it. I don't have anything regarding these issues right here. Jim, AFTW, anything?
I'm going to defer to Jared on that since I missed most of the meeting. Anything we need to bring up here that we didn't already?
No, there's a lot of talk about procedures at Stanfield and then the approaches into Coolidge. That was a lot of it. But yeah, I think they did record it. So if anybody didn't get to hear it, go back, check YouTube, and it'll be there shortly, I think. But that was the bulk of it.
Okay. Craig, are you on Tompkins?
I am, Phil.
Okay, fast team, any fast team information?
Not really. We continue to, and not really DPE issues per se, at least I hope not. We continue to get complaints from the Northeast practice area, low flyers over the populated areas. Also getting a lot of balloon complaints because of good balloon weather, but that has nothing to do with y'all. But that's about it.
Okay. All right. I don't know of any other programs that are going on. I don't think, I think the last thing was what the one in November, what was that? Did they even have that? The banquet? They didn't even have the banquet and all that for the, what is that? CFI of the year or something like that?
Well, I can speak to that. That's coming up at the end of this month. It was delayed. Actually carries on too. He can probably speak to it better than I can, but I think we've got an announcement on spans on FAA safety, and it's going to be virtual, probably hour and a half long. So
which one is, what's the title of that program?
It's the Arizona Aviation Safety Advisory Group Annual Awards Banquet.
That's it. Okay.
And that will be the 23rd of January. It's a Saturday from 5 o'clock. And as Craig said, about an hour and a half. We did not get any CFI nominations this year or mechanics. So there will be no awards for those people. And it's rather disappointing because I think this is the first time we have ever not had nominations in those positions.
Huh.
We do have fast team lead representative. The Arizona Pilots Association will give away the Ruth Reinhold Award. And we have a Airport of the Year award to give as well. But we did not receive an ATC Communicator of the Year award either. And it is disappointing because usually the big flight schools come through with their CFI nominations. We didn't get anything from Riddle or Oxford or ATP or any of the schools.
Okay.
It could be a sign of the times.
I think that's probably what it is. It's probably the furthest thing from a lot of people's minds right now. Thanks, Carrie. Okay. Any other comments from the DPEs? Nothing? Okay. Okay. Anything from the FSDO representatives?
Nothing from me.
Okay. All right, here we go. Guests, we got a bunch of you on here. Anyone have any comments to make? Any information they want, any questions they want to ask, anything at all?
There's a comment in the chat that says, it's asking that AirGuard was furloughing 40 CFIs and selling aircraft, and if anybody knew anything more details about that.
Oof. Didn't hear about that. That's a shame. Any of the other guests on there? I know I got some other CFIs on there. Do you have any questions or comments on anything we talked about today or any past meetings of questions you might have?
I'm Kimberly, and I want to thank you for, everything you talk about here. I've never been on one of these particular Zoom meetings before. One of the things I wanted to say was, I think there was some confusion about the light gun signals and being, outside the airspace. You're only outside the airspace, in my understanding, until you determine the flow of traffic. And then you're just going to enter the airspace and look for the light gun signals. I don't think that you would see the light gun signals outside the airspace. So I think the rest of that sentence is really important to pay attention to.
Good point. Let me bring that up here.
Yeah, it's pretty clear when you look at that reference we had that Bob found. So good point, Kimberly.
Yes, thanks.
Until the direction and flow of traffic has been determined.
That's it. Yeah.
There it is. Okay.
I think that's a good example. And it hasn't happened a lot for me. The couple people I'm thinking of, I don't even remember what the exact scenario was or what they exactly said, but I just hadn't remembered ever hearing about staying out of the Delta in those scenarios. So thank you for the reference and clarification.
Yeah, thank you guys for all this great information.
Yep, there it is right there. Good. That's why we like this input, Kimberly.
This is Paul Wagaman. Just want to thank you guys for opening this to us. I'm a relatively new CFI. I'm part of AFTW and ASAG and but appreciate the decision having you guys open this up to us.
Well, we appreciate you showing up, Paul, because that's what this whole thing is about, is to try to get more and more people involved in, with different ideas and, issues that need to be addressed, without, and like I said, anything that we try to do as anonymous as much as possible. Because that's the intent, is just to get as much information as we can. And that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, this is Phil, the other Phil, and I appreciate it too. How will I know, this first one I've sit in on, how will I know when this will be available in the future? Does it come out some?
You mean the future meetings or this particular meeting?
No, future meetings when you have, and you,
it's
really, it's okay to sit in on it.
Yeah, it's real easy because you're going to see it on the last slide here. It is
Okay.
Always the second Tuesday of the month. And for now, it's going to be starting at this point. I got to discuss some things with Jim yet on the AFTW side of it. But for now, it's going to be starting at 2:00 on the second Tuesday of each month. The only months that we really do, of course, I skipped December for obvious reasons, with a lot going on with the holidays. And I think the only other time we do it, I think, is August, because there tends to be a lot of people out of town trying to get out of the heat. But those are pretty much the only 2 months, Phil. So it's the second Tuesday of every month. You'll still need a login that I'll have to get to you. So
basically, they need to get on your email list, right, Phil?
yeah, that's what you want to do, is just email me that you are, because I have a master for the DPE group and the FSDO, and then I have a list that is growing for people like yourself that want to get on this, so you don't necessarily have to get it from somebody else. I can actually email you the link.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead and go to the chat. Anyone that wants to get on this list, I just shared Phil Remmel's email address. So shoot an email. I see some people putting it in the chat here. This may disappear here as soon as we log off. So go ahead and grab Phil Remmel's email address there and send him an email requesting to be added to the instructor list that he has. And that's probably the best way to do it, because we're not putting it on FASafety.gov or anywhere else.
Right. And like I say, anyone that you feel would benefit from this is more than welcome to do this.
And Phil, real quick, if you don't mind discussing it here, Brian Baker, I jumped off the AFTW meeting. How much longer did that run today? I'm just curious, because you guys started at 1 and I jumped off right at 2.
It went like 3-4 more minutes.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah, he wrapped it up. Right
so we
then,
might be able to keep this meeting at 2, Phil. I mean, for a lot of us, it's a long sit to roll through all of both meetings. But
mine's the more entertaining one.
Yeah, we were considering making this DP meeting later. So I guess let's not make any decisions right now. If you have a concern about starting the DPE meeting later than 2 p.m., please share that with one of the POCs or with Phil. And if we don't get any objections, we might push this even just 30 minutes, but we'll talk about that later.
I think the 30-minute bio break is a good idea.
especially as the guy that I got to record the AFTW meeting, you felt a little captive there.
A little bit.
For doing that, Brian.
I gotta go.
Also for the guests and of course the DPEs, I didn't get any input this time for this meeting of items to talk about. So what I like to do is I create the agenda, it can be changed up until a few minutes before I start it. And of course, we can bring in anything we want while the meeting has been started. But anybody that has anything, guests or DPEs, comments of items that you want to discuss, I really appreciate the input because it helps me out an awful lot to know what's really going on out there because I don't see it like I used to. So any input from the guests as well, that things you want to discuss, certain areas of operation or certain types of aircraft issues or whatever, please, with that, you got my email there, please send those to me because I'm wide open for anything that y'all want to talk about.
Thank you all for sharing your knowledge and information. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Lee. Appreciate you attending.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Phil, Kerry Grant here.
Yeah.
For most of the people who know who I am, but a lot don't, I'm the president of the Arizona Aviation Safety Advisory Group. And one of the things I brought up in the FTW was that the POG sent out a letter saying that, if you don't know what the POG is, that's the Phoenix Area Airspace Users Working Group. And they sent out a letter saying they were not going to hold any more POGs until COVID because they can't hold the meetings at the Tempe Library. I don't see a reason why they can't hold them virtually. And I'm wondering from the group of DPEs if they have airspace issues that they think need to be brought up and discussed. And I know that Jim Pittman was working on the GPS 2.5 into Deer Valley. I think there are a number of airspace issues here in the valley that we need to talk about and problem areas. And I think we should be having a POG meeting to discuss these issues. And I'd like to use my forum as the ASAG president to try and get some pressure on getting the POG meetings held virtually. So some feedback from the
Any
DPE.
idea what their resistance is?
They said, well, their resistance was they were using COVID as an excuse to not have them in person at the library. And they just said until indefinitely, the POGs are canceled.
Interesting.
And Carrie, this is Craig. They also included in that same communication that there was, due to COVID, there was nothing new or unusual happening within the airspace, no changes planned. And so that was another reason they didn't feel it was a necessity.
But I think that the issues have been highlighted that is not necessarily true.
Don't disagree with you, Carrie. That's just what was in the communication.
Right. Thanks, Craig. So
yeah, well, Carrie, any input you can tell them after you sat through one of these things is that this is another vehicle for them, because I think having been to two of those things, I don't see why they couldn't do it virtually. With PowerPoints or whatever, you can put your maps up there and your approach charts and so on and so forth. So it should be able to be done.
I think it could be done, and what I'm hearing is that it sounds like a lot of people would like to discuss airspace issues. So I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Any other comments from guests? Nothing? Okay. The next meeting will be February 9th, 2021. For now at 2 o'clock, and I will send out, about a week before, I'll send out the notice again. And once again, for those of you that want to be on the mailing list, Jim put my email out there, so just email me. Otherwise, I think we're getting enough people now. We had 27 individuals here, and looks like 4 of them had the audacity to leave before I said the meeting's over. Yeah, but
how dare they at a voluntary meeting?
Yeah, right. That's right. But anyway, hopefully this is beneficial to those of you that have just started showing up at these things. And once again, it's not a one-way show. This is a two-way endeavor. So the more input that I or the group gets from the guests as well, the flight instructors from the schools, so on and so forth. That it's the whole idea behind this is to try to get more and more information out there and try to keep everyone on the same page as much as possible. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for letting me sit in.
Good job, Phil. Thanks.
See you next month.
See ya.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Phil, great job.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.